50 surprising and little-known facts about Consuelo Vanderbilt. Consuelo Vanderbilt remains one of the most captivating figures of the Gilded Age, an American heiress whose marriage to a British duke was less a fairy tale than a transaction of wealth and title. Celebrated as the ultimate dollar princess, she embodied grace and duty while secretly yearning for freedom. Behind the grandeur of Blenheim Palace, Consuelo carved her own path, becoming a quiet icon of resilience and refinement. In this video, we reveal 50 facts about the woman who wed British nobility, but never surrendered her autonomy. You're watching Cultured Elegance. Make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. The making of a debutante, childhood, youth, and courtship. Consuelo Vanderbilt was born in 1877 into the house of one of America's richest dynasties. Her grandfather, Cornelius Commodore, had built a shipping and railroad empire, and her father, William K. Vanderbilt, inherited vast sums, but her childhood was anything but idyllic. Her mother, Alva Vanderbilt, ruled the household with military precision and ambitions far beyond Fifth Avenue. From infancy, Consuelo was not treated as a child, but as a carefully molded instrument of social ascent. The ordeal of perfection. Under Alva's regime, Consuelo was subjected to daily rituals of physical discomfort, all in the name of grooming her into the ideal debutante. Her mother made her wear an iron neck brace for hours at a time to ensure a swan-like posture. At night, her ears were taped to her head with surgical gauze so they wouldn't stick out. Every aspect of her body was scrutinized and corrected. What appeared to the outside world as refinement was in fact a quietly enforced discipline that bordered on cruelty. A childhood of fear and force. Alva's tyranny was not limited to cosmetic training. Consuelo would later recall being physically beaten when she expressed dissent or questioned her future. In her memoir, she wrote of being slapped across the face and whipped with riding crops for speaking out of turn. Her upbringing was less a childhood than a regime, marked not by affection, but by fear. Consuelo's education was as calculated as her appearance. She was trained in French, music, manners, and embroidery, but little else. Her mother had no intention of raising a scholar or free thinker. Tutors were hired less for academic rigor and more for social polish. Her instruction was meant to prepare her for palaces, not personal independence. As a teenager, Consuelo found rare happiness in a budding romance with a respectable young American, Winthrop Rutherford. They became secretly engaged, exchanging vows of love and plans for a modest but heartfelt future. But Alva saw no value in an untitled match. She intercepted their letters and used emotional blackmail to end the engagement, forever closing the door on what Consuelo called the only love I ever knew. When Consuelo protested Alva's chosen match, the 9th Duke of Marlborough, she was locked in her room and forbidden to eat. Alva faked illness, threatened to die of heartbreak, and refused to let her daughter see anyone. Under this crushing pressure, Consuelo finally capitulated. She was just 17 when she agreed to become a duchess, sacrificing her happiness for duty. The 1895 wedding between Consuelo Vanderbilt and the Duke of Marlborough was heralded as the transatlantic marriage of the century. Held at St. Thomas Church in New York, it was attended by Astors, Vanderbilts, and diplomats alike. But behind the veil, Consuelo wept silently. "I was not a free woman," she later wrote. She was, in essence, sold in Vanderbilt railroad stock for $2.5 million, equivalent to $80 million today. Upon arrival at Blenheim Palace, the sprawling ancestral estate of the Marlboroughs, Consuelo found no comfort in her new title. The British aristocracy viewed her with disdain, and her husband treated her with barely concealed contempt. She may have been the mistress of a great house, but she was made to feel like an unwelcome guest. an unconsummated union for weeks. Rumors circulated that the Duke refused to consummate the marriage for several weeks. He found Consuelo dull and uninteresting, and she, in turn, felt nothing but coldness and rejection from him. The romantic fantasies of duchesshood evaporated almost immediately. She once remarked that they lived together but apart. A controlling husband to match her mother. The Duke continued the pattern of dominance that had marked her mother's influence. He dictated every part of Consuelo's life: how she dressed, how she spoke, what charities she could support. If she attempted to express herself, she was dismissed. Blenheim Palace became her second prison, grander but no freer. Consuelo fulfilled her dynastic role by giving birth to 2 sons, John and Ivor, thus securing the Marlborough line. But with the duty completed, her husband grew even more distant. They lived increasingly separate lives, and any semblance of affection dissolved entirely. She later referred to those years as a long, slow erasure. Secret correspondence with her first love. Despite her imposed life, Consuelo continued to write to Winthrop Rutherford in secret. The letters were tender, reflective, and painfully wistful, but when he eventually married another, Consuelo's heart broke all over again. She wept alone in her rooms at Blenheim, mourning not just a man, but a version of herself she could never recover. A mother's confession. Too late. Years later, long after the glamour had faded and the marriage had soured, Alva publicly confessed to having forced her daughter into a loveless marriage. "I made her do it," she admitted, but the damage was already done. Consuelo's youth had been bartered away in pursuit of aristocratic fantasy, and the apology, though sincere, could not undo the scars. The Duchess years, isolation, rebellion, and quiet affairs. The Duke blamed her for giving birth to only sons. Despite producing a male heir, something many noble women were pressured to deliver, Consuelo faced disappointment from her husband. The Duke of Marlborough, obsessed with dynastic strategy, lamented the absence of a daughter who might have forged alliances through marriage. This cruel twist of aristocratic logic left Consuelo emotionally isolated in her most intimate role as a mother. Even while ill, she was pushed into public duties, serving as a decorative extension of her husband's legacy. Her personal well-being was subordinate to the image she was tasked with upholding. Even at her most vulnerable, she was paraded like a treasured possession, not a treasured wife. She privately called Blenheim cold, dark, and oppressive. Though one of the grandest estates in England, Blenheim Palace offered Consuelo little comfort. In private letters and memoirs, she described its endless corridors and imposing architecture as spiritually stifling. It was a gilded cage, one that dwarfed her individuality and reinforced her sense of confinement. She had a strong, often rebellious streak. Beneath her quiet smile and polished exterior lay a woman of remarkable inner defiance. Consuelo had been groomed for obedience, yet she harbored a private resistance. Her rebellion was not loud, but it was consistent. She refused to disappear into the role she was forced to play. She began reading voraciously, pushing against the intellectual boredom expected of noblewomen. At Blenheim, Consuelo found solace in books. While other duchesses might have immersed themselves in embroidery and etiquette, she devoured literature, philosophy, history, and politics. Her mind refused to be idle, even when her voice had to be. She found escape in art and fashion. The visual world offered her a language of freedom. Consuelo cultivated friendships with artists, designers, and illustrators across Europe, favoring the soft elegance of Jean Paquin and calotseurs over the rigid grandeur of English fashion. She was photographed in stunning couture long before it was fashionable for duchesses. In an age when noble women were expected to dress with restraint, Consuelo embraced daring silhouettes and fine tailoring. she became an early icon of aristocratic modernity, refined yet refreshingly bold. Her portraits, by Boldini and Helio, were considered daring for the time, inspiring fashion trends across Europe. The Italian artist Giovanni Boldini captured her with movement, sensuality, and spirit, far from the stiff oil paintings typical of duchesses. Paul César Helio's elegant etchings immortalized her profile. These portraits didn't just flatter her, they challenged the conventions of noble portraiture and helped recast her image on her own terms. She began supporting women's suffrage, quietly. Though her public role forbade outright activism, Consuelo channeled her convictions into private philanthropy. She donated to suffrage organizations and hosted discreet gatherings of like-minded women, using her wealth and platform to quietly push for change. She defied expectations by speaking publicly. In private circles, she gave talks on poverty and child welfare, causing discomfort among her aristocratic peers. These topics, mundane to modern ears, were considered unseemly for a woman of her rank. But Consuelo persisted, driven by compassion and conviction. A duchess using her voice for the voiceless, it scandalized some and inspired others. She helped rebrand the Vanderbilt name abroad. At a time when American heiresses were mocked as nouveau riche, Consuelo lent the Vanderbilt name something more refined, continental legitimacy. Her grace, poise, and intellect softened the brash image of American wealth in European eyes. No longer merely the railroad heiress, she became a global symbol of cultivated femininity. Europe saw in her the success of American ambition when tempered by elegance and restraint. She was once mobbed in Paris by fashion admirers. Her influence was not confined to stately homes. During a visit to a Paris couture house, her appearance caused such a stir that the crowd swelled beyond control. So intense was the attention that she had to be escorted out through a discreet side exit. It was a moment both flattering and absurd, proof that she had become, quite unintentionally, a celebrity duchess. The escape, divorce, renewal, and her second life in France. She eventually divorced the Duke, an extraordinary scandal. In 1921, Consuelo and the 9th Duke of Marlborough formally separated after years of private misery and public performance. The decision sent shockwaves through British high society and was considered nearly sacrilegious among her American family, who had sacrificed so much for her coronation as Duchess. At a time when divorce among the aristocracy was rare and deeply frowned upon, her quiet rebellion became a defining rupture. From New York to London, newspapers devoured the news that the world's most prominent dollar princess had chosen personal freedom over ducal obligation. The press had long painted her as the fairy tale bride who had won Blenheim. Now she was reframed as the disenchanted duchess, breaking tradition in pursuit of happiness. She reunited with her true love, Winthrop Rutherford, years later. The man she had loved in her youth, wealthy, discreet, and American, reappeared in her life after her separation. Their bond rekindled, though marriage remained elusive. Their relationship, once severed by maternal ambition and social expectation, now hovered tenderly on the margins of middle age. She later married Jacques Balsan, a French aviator and textile heir. In 1921, the same year she was freed from the Duke, she married Balsan, a cultured and generous man descended from the founders of the French wool empire. A former balloonist and aviation pioneer, Jacques was her equal in spirit, and their union had none of the cold, transactional calculation of her first. This was a true love match. The marriage to Balsan was a balm after years of suppression. He respected her intellect, supported her interests, and gave her the freedom she had always been denied. It was a partnership of mutual admiration rather than strategic alliance. Jacques wrote her tender letters in verse, often comparing her to classical muses. He adored not only her beauty, but her soul, nourishing a sense of inner peace she had long been denied. She helped transform the Balsan Villa in Cap d'Antibes into a cultural retreat. Villa Saint-Georges, perched above the glittering Riviera coastline, became their sanctuary. Under her touch, it was transformed into a stylish and welcoming retreat, part salon, part refuge. Their home hosted artists, aviators, and socialites. Coco Chanel, the Duke and Duchess of Windsor, and Jean Cocteau were all frequent guests. It was here that Consuelo finally stepped into her role as a cultivated hostess, on her own terms. She quietly supported anti-fascist movements. As the 1930s darkened into war, Consuelo and Jacques opened their home to the French resistance. Their fortune and discretion made them ideal allies to those who could not speak publicly. She supported escape routes, offered discreet funding, and provided shelter when few others dared. Long before the armistice, Saint-Georges became known as a safe harbor. Jewish artists, displaced writers, and intellectuals fleeing the Nazis found food, rest, and moral support within its stone walls. She wrote a best-selling memoir, but left out key details. In 1953, she published The Glitter and the Gold, a graceful memoir that enchanted readers with its glimpse into Gilded Age extravagance and royal obligation. Yet it conspicuously omitted her personal turmoil, her affair with Winthrop, her emotional unravelings, her frustrations with motherhood and marriage, painting instead a polished public version of a private woman. Her first marriage was annulled on spiritual grounds, decades after divorce. In 1926, the Vatican, after a lengthy and complex process, granted her a rare annulment from the Duke, allowing her to marry in the Church. This ecclesiastical reset shocked many in both England and America, who viewed the gesture as an uncomfortable merging of piety and privilege. She warned debutantes not to marry for a title. In later years, Consuelo became a behind-the-scenes guide for younger women entering society. Her cautionary tale was whispered over teacups and charity balls. Never mistake a coronet for affection. She urged them to pursue learning, love, and self-respect. She watched her own sons' marriages suffer. With bitter irony, her eldest son, John, the 10th Duke, entered a cold, loveless marriage, echoing her own youthful mistake. Though she had tried to break the cycle, she saw history repeat itself in the gilded cages of her children. Her final years: legacy, reflection, and departure. She never reconciled fully with her mother. Though they resumed polite correspondence in later years, the damage Alva had inflicted through emotional manipulation, public control, and even physical abuse, never fully forgiving the childhood that was stolen from her. Consuelo's story, rich in romance, sacrifice, and rebellion, became a prototype for literary heroines trapped by society's expectations. She notably inspired the central character in Edith Wharton's The Buccaneers, a tale of American girls married off to British titles at terrible emotional cost. She broke aristocratic taboos on divorce, remarriage, and independence. Long before it was socially acceptable, Consuelo left her dynastic marriage, carved out a second life in France, and publicly aligned herself with humanitarian causes. She outlived most of the society she once ruled. By the time of her death in 1964, the world that had once worshipped her had vanished. Blenheim was open to tourists, and the great Vanderbilt mansions had either fallen to ruin or become museums of lost grandeur. She survived the extinction of her own aristocratic epoch. She died far from England's aristocracy. In her final years, Consuelo chose peace over pageantry. She passed away in Southampton, Long Island, a quiet retreat far removed from English peerage, royal audiences, or dynastic expectations. She was buried next to her second husband, not the Duke. A final, unspoken statement. Though once forced to uphold a marriage for the sake of dynastic prestige, her heart rested with Jacques Balsan, the man who never asked her to be anything but herself. What began as a gilded fairy tale ended as a call to conscience. Writers and historians later re-examined her life, not just as tragedy or spectacle, but as a portrait of resistance, a woman who defied a system without declaring war on it. She is now considered one of history's most elegant rebels. Consuelo shaped her own fate, not with noise, but with persistence, taste, and integrity. She lived long enough to see women get the vote in both the United States and the United Kingdom. From her early donations to suffragist groups to witnessing the victories of women's enfranchisement, Consuelo saw social progress unfold in her lifetime, offering quiet vindication for her beliefs. She received letters from Eleanor Roosevelt and other world leaders. Her philanthropic work and transatlantic stature brought her into contact with figures like Roosevelt, whose admiration for Consuelo's post-ducal endeavors was sincere. She was no longer just a duchess, but a woman of global conscience. In her later years, Consuelo reportedly spoke candidly about the traumas and sacrifices of her youth, but she did so with perspective, not bitterness, offering younger generations a model of dignity hard-earned. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to explore my most recommended books on Consuelo Vanderbilt, linked in the description below, and let me know in the comments which facts surprised you the most, or is there one you think I should have included? If you'd like to support the channel, you'll find links to our weekly newsletter and channel membership options also in the description. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who loves history and elegance. Until next time.